just as I was on the verge of giving up. Finally, at long last, a small ray of light broke through the wall of dark clouds.
お母さん、具合いいみたいね。
My mother was eating a mandarin orange served as a treat after her meal. Her expression was placid, as always.
今日はなんだか体も軽く感じるわ。
But for once, it didn't look like a mask she'd plastered onto her face. The peace in her eyes seemed real, something that had flowed naturally to the surface from deep inside her. Our retreat to the quiet of the countryside hadn't done much at first. If anything, our family tensions had probably taken a toll on my mother. But after many years of peace, it seemed her mind was slowly beginning to regain its equilibrium. The recent downturn had given way to weeks of steady improvement. Once you can meet your own needs, it becomes possible to worry about the needs of others. My mother had begun to give my questions real responses for the first time in years.
お医者さんもいい兆しだっておっしゃってたし、来週からはお薬も減らしていくっていうことだったから、それで。
We'd never been able to discuss her treatment, but lately, it had become a safe topic of conversation. Specifically, her progress was so promising that a discharge from the hospital was coming into view at long last.
来週の月曜日、おばあちゃんと一緒に先生にお話を聞くから、そこでいろいろと今後のことも聞いてくるわね。あと、
由美子。
何？お母さん。
由美子。ね。ごめんね。お母さん、ひどいこと言って。あなたにこれだけしてもらっておいて、私、男の子の方がいいとか。
お母さん、いいから。ほら、みかん食べたから手が汚れてる。はい、ティッシュ。食べた皮片付けるわね。
ありがとう。
いいのよ。お母さんは直すことに専念してくれればいいから。私、そろそろ戻るね。また明日来るから。
そう？ゆっくりしていけばいいのに。
また明日来るから。
I stood up and waved goodbye with a quavery smile. My mother was still sitting in profile, but I could tell she was smiling in return. Holding that image in my mind, I slipped quietly out of the room. The moment I closed the door behind me, the world began to shimmer through a wall of tears.
お母さん、よかった。
I couldn't remember the last time my mother had showed that kind of concern for me. I don't know if she ever had. By the standard of a healthy parent-child relationship, I guess it was an insignificantly small thing. But for me, at that moment, those tentative words of compassion were enough to inspire overwhelming happiness. Happiness so strong that I couldn't help but break down and sob.
よくなる。よくなってる。
I spoke the words again and again, as if to fix that fact more firmly in reality. Perhaps Toshie-san had taken pity on me and stopped by to heal my mother on her way to heaven. Things were suddenly moving in such a positive direction that such thoughts seemed almost plausible. The next week, my grandmother and I went to meet with Mom's physician for an update on her condition. Normally, I was the only one who attended these meetings, but the progress was significant enough that he asked Grandma to come as well.
美佐子さんは間違いなく解放に向かっています。
Flipping through the papers in his hand, he gave us a detailed account of my mother's symptoms and current status. Not that I really needed to hear any of it. I already knew she was recovering. For someone who'd visited her every single day for years, it was impossible to miss the transformation.
それでもう娘は大丈夫なんでしょうか。
Once the doctor's explanation came to an end, my grandmother leaned forward, clinging to his arm as she spoke.
治療も順調に進んでおりますし、このまま退院の準備を始めてもいいでしょう。
The moment those words left his mouth, my grandmother lowered her head so deeply, I thought she might topple out of her chair and prostrate herself on the floor.
ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます、先生。
やめてください。頭をお上げになってください。
これで榊さんの家にも申し訳が立ちます。ありがとうございます。
Grandma continued to lavish her thanks on the doctor, as always, doing her best to pretend that I wasn't even in the room. Mom's return to her husband would ensure that the Kawamoto business would continue receiving support from the Sakaki family. It was blatantly obvious from my grandmother's words that it was the sole reason for her gratitude. To the woman who'd brought her into the world, my mother was nothing but a defective political tool, but that only strengthened my determination to take care of her. Once the doctor's explanation was over, my grandmother went straight home without even stopping by to see her daughter's face. I heard her muttering the names of business partners to herself as she went. She was probably planning to hurry back to the house and inform them of the news. Then again, I wasn't exactly eager to have her visit my mother with that sort of an attitude, so if anything, her quick departure was convenient.
お母さん、来週退院が決まったわ。
Dropping a pile of magazines and books onto the shelf as usual, I spoke to my mother in a tone of sincere cheerfulness.
そう。じゃあ、おばあちゃんやおじいちゃんに迷惑をかけることもなくなるのね。うん。何より、こうやって由美子に来てもらわなくても大丈夫になるから、それが一番安心ね。
お母さん。
私、由美子にこうして負担をかけてるのが本当に申し訳なかったから。
My mother spoke those words with real remorse in her voice. But at that moment, the burden didn't seem so heavy. My mother's feelings were more than enough compensation.
カーテン、開けてもらえるかしら。
Just as requested, I pulled back the curtains from the window at Mom's side. A vault of blue stretched out beyond the panes of glass. It was the very picture of a summer sky. Compared to the heart of the city where the Sakaki house stood, the blue in that place seemed far more pure and vivid.
今日もいい天気ね。ここを出るときには一度屋上に上がって空を見てみたいわ。
Toshie-san told me that my mother had always enjoyed gazing at the sky. She didn't look for anything in particular, just tilted her head back and watched. And when people asked her why, she could never find an answer. Memories from the day we first came to the town flashed into my mind. We'd walked hand in hand under a beautiful blue sky, but Mother's dull, lifeless eyes had never left the path below our feet. But she had finally remembered the sky. That could only mean she was on her way to recovery.
そうだね。ここを出るときには一緒に空を見ようね。
そうね。
It occurred to me that I didn't have a single memory of the two of us doing something like that together. I found myself very much looking forward to the small event that would accompany my mother's discharge from the hospital. Everything was moving in a positive direction. The stupidly optimistic scenario I'd sketched out in my imagination was coming closer and closer to reality. My mother's recovery produced clear changes in my own emotions. I'd barely spoken to anyone in the weeks since Toshie-san's death, but I was slowly beginning to communicate with those around me. My grandparents still kept their distance, but if I approached them myself using my mother as a pretext, I could at least get them to have a conversation with me. Mom's recovery was their primary objective, after all. They couldn't avoid hearing me out if I brought it up. Watching my grandparents interact with me, despite obvious reluctance, I felt as though I'd achieved a small but significant rebellion against the people who'd spent years ignoring my very existence. I'm right here. I'm in an important position. More than anything else, that sense of meaning gave me strength. In school, the others still rejected my very existence, but that didn't bother me much anymore. I would be returning to the Sakaki house once my mother recovered. This hollow school life would be over soon enough. The end was in sight. That suffocating feeling of entrapment was gone. No matter what they said about me, no matter how they laughed, it rolled off me harmlessly. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, I was hurrying to school through the rain. The drizzle that had begun a little after midnight was just picking up into a steady, heavy rain as I left the house. My umbrella wasn't enough to catch it all. Pausing for a moment, I glanced up at the angry sky beyond the edge of my umbrella. It was covered in deep black clouds from horizon to horizon, without so much as a patch of clear sky in between.
お母さん、憂鬱だろうな。
Since our conversation the other day, Mom had begun to spend a lot of time looking out her window. That was nice enough when the weather was clear, but staring up at a menacing sky like that might just inspire a bit of gloominess, just as her feelings were finally starting to take an upward swing. I'd have to hurry to the hospital and cheer Mom up as soon as school was over. With that thought, I began to walk again. And just as I'd reached the intersection between the road, the school, and the main street leading to the station, a familiar face appeared around the corner.
どうもどうも。由美子ちゃん、久しぶりだね。元気。
おじさん。
But it wasn't a face I was eager to see. I instantly recognized the tabloid reporter who had once wheedled me into becoming a source for an article that mixed fragments of truth with innuendo and lies. Standing under a large jet black umbrella that seemed to mirror the rain clouds above, he looked me over with a faint smile on his face.
いやー、しばらく見ないうちに可愛くなったね。お母さん譲りかな。それともお父さんに似たのかな。
His words seemed to have grown even greasier and more presumptuous than before. When I walked past him silently, the reporter fell uneasily beside me, keeping pace as though I'd invited him to follow.
ちょっと聞きたいことがあってね。またここに来るようになったんだけど、そこの喫茶店で話とか聞かせてくれないかな。
以前にも言いましたよね。私はあなたにお話しするようなことは一切ありません。
そんな。君のお父さんのことじゃないか。話すことなんかたくさんあると思うんだけどな。
ありません。父とはもう何年も会っていないんです。
It was incredibly unpleasant to have this man bring up that topic now. The Sakaki house was the invisible mass around which we all orbited. I knew my current lifestyle was possible only because of his financial support, but sometimes I couldn't help feeling a powerful burst of resentment toward the father I barely knew. In particular, when people carelessly assumed we must have some kind of relationship.
もういいですから、付きまとわないでください。変な噂を立てられるので。
Stopping briefly, I spat out the clearest possible rejection, then quickly turned around to leave. I couldn't allow trouble of this sort to arise so soon before Mom was to leave the hospital. There was no telling how speaking to this man for even the briefest of moments might come back to haunt me.
本当にそうなのかな。
The reporter, no longer trying to follow, called out to me from behind. His words were suggestive, his tone unusually serious. I came to a halt despite myself.
だから、何なんですか、一体。
Rationally, I understand. It would have been the same either way. I know it wasn't the cause of what would follow. But still, somewhere deep down inside, I can't help believing everything would have been different if only I'd walked away.
そうもいかないんだよ。だってこの話、君に弟ができたってことなんだからね。
What?
弟？
When I turned back to face him, the man was wiping at his rain-damp forehead with a knowing smirk on his face.
これに乗ってるよ。 もっとも由美子ちゃんが読むような雑誌じゃないけどね。
The reporter reached out and presented me with a magazine, already open to a certain article. Practically grabbing it from his hands, I ran my eyes frantically across the page. And the moment I saw that headline, the blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid. East Beach Express President Sakaki Michiaki's illegitimate child? Long-awaited son born to a mistress. Bold sans-serif headlines, emphasized by sharp decorative flourishes. Below, the face of a man I hadn't seen in a while lined up with the portrait of his unfamiliar partner. Paragraphs full of vicious words that I could barely stand to read. And at the very end, one sentence that plunged me below even despair. As I had doubted my ears in a hospital room weeks before, this time I doubted my eyes. Currently arranging for divorce from his wife. Those few brief words, buried in the final paragraph as if they were the most trivial thing in the world, hit me with the force of a hurricane. I'd heard the rumors. I more or less understood that father was that sort of person. But there was no worse way to have those suspicions confirmed. Why? Why now when my mother was recuperating in the hospital? Why now when she was finally getting better? Was this article even true? Many thoughts swirled chaotically through my head. My hands trembled and lost their hold on the hateful piece of paper.
うわ、ちょっと落とさないでよ。これだって一応資料なんだからさ。
The magazine fell to the wet pavement with a slap. As it hit the ground, the pages that had been folded back flipped around, revealing the cover. And as if to turn the dagger in my wound, one final piece of information was revealed to me.
この雑誌
A tasteful work from a well-known painter behind a number of carefully arranged headlines in a firm serif typeface. A weekly magazine, but one that clearly distinguished itself from the tabloids and gossip rags. A magazine of some credibility. A magazine my mother asked for every week.
というわけで、ぜひこの件についてお姉ちゃんとしてコメントを聞きたいんだけど、時間をってちょっとおい。
Charging off the sidewalk that ran alongside the prefectural highway, I sprinted all out along a farm road, slanted diagonally way through fields of green. The path didn't turn toward my school, so it offered an ever so slightly more direct route. But it was only a farm road. In places, it hadn't even been paved. It was an extremely difficult course to run on a rainy day.
お母さんがこれを読んだりしたら
But I didn't have the luxury of worrying about that right at the moment. I needed to get to the hospital as soon as I possibly could. I needed to stop my mother. With recent improvement in her condition, Mom had started to leave her room and visit the hospital store to purchase her own books and magazines. If the nurses were still delivering them with the mail, there was at least a chance they'd check for articles that might upset her. But it was hard to imagine the clerks in the shop would have been told to do the same. Halfway there, I could no longer muster the effort to keep my umbrella upright above me. I let the rain strike me and focused all my attention on running. Water went flying everywhere with every heavy stride, slapping against my legs, soaking my skirt. The small ember of satisfaction warming my chest only minutes before had been smothered completely out of existence. I was cold to my very core.
ちょっと廊下を走らないでください。
すみません
My momentum barely slowed after arriving at the hospital. I understood perfectly well that running in the hallways was off limits, but the rules I'd always obeyed mattered less than reaching my destination even a moment sooner.
お母さんお母さん
Turning a corner on the third floor, I finally entered the wing reserved for private rooms. A moment later, my feet came to an abrupt halt. There was something unusual going on in front of that familiar door. For a moment, I was simply bewildered. Three strange men in expensive suits were standing just outside my mother's room, talking to each other, just on the verge of entering. A vague but powerful sense of dread ran through my body like a jolt of electricity.
何をしてるんですか
I shouted angrily as I approached. The man who'd been reaching for the door hesitated. Before I could continue, the white-haired man at the head of the little group preempted me with a question.
失礼ですが、どちら様ですか？
この病室の榊美佐子の娘です。あなたたちこそ誰なんですか？母に何のご用ですか？
Unperturbed by my fierce attitude, the white-haired man answered with a calm smile.
ああ、あなたが由美子さんですね。申し遅れました。私、榊家の顧問弁護士をしております津田と申します。
顧問弁護士？
ええ、この度はお母様の件でちょっとお話がございまして立ち寄らせていただきました。お母様はいらっしゃいますか？
The magazine article I'd read minutes before flashed vividly before my eyes. Currently arranging for divorce. In a heartbeat, my mind connected those words to this lawyer's sudden arrival.
会わせません。
は？
母と父を離婚させるために来たのでしょう。今母は病気なんです。そんな話なんかしたらどうなるかわかるでしょう。
由美子さん、それは誤解です。私たちはその件ではなく今後のお二人のことについて。
嘘！さっき雑誌で見たわ。全部知ってるんだから。
The man's composed face distorted into a scowl at the word magazine. He must have been trying to reach us before that information did.
仕方ないな。おい。
はい。With a small movement of the lawyer's hand, the two men who'd been hanging back moved quickly toward me. They had me physically subdued before I could even register surprise. One man had slipped behind me and caught my arms in a firm, full Nelson. The other stood in front of me like a wall, eliminating any chance of escape. I screamed desperately, but they weren't the sort of people to flinch at the cries of a young woman. The private wing was never a busy place. Today it was entirely empty, and with the heavy rain drumming down outside, I doubt anyone elsewhere in the building ever heard my voice. And of course, against the strength of two full-grown adults, a child like myself was completely powerless.
しばらくおとなしくしていてください。
The lawyer's voice had grown cold. It was the all-too-familiar voice of an adult.
榊美佐子さん、弁護士の津田と申します。お話があって参りました。失礼しますよ。
His words were extremely polite. If anything, that made them all the more frightening. Ignoring my tear-choked plea, he pushed open the door to my mother's hospital room. I was the first to react. The bed sitting by the window, which had always been occupied before, was now empty.
うざいか。まあいい。待たせてもらうこととしよう。
In contrast to the perpetually calm lawyer, I was filled with a profound sense of unease. The doctors always made their rounds at this time of the day. None of the patients were allowed to move around freely, much less my mother. They'd given her a normal space for the sake of camouflage, but by all rights, she belonged in a room with bars on the window. Normally, it wouldn't be unusual to move a patient only 3 days from discharge back to the hospital's general ward, but my mother's condition was still delicate. Her physician had decided to handle everything cautiously until the very end. It just wasn't possible that Mom had simply stepped out at this time of day.
何ですか、あなたたちは。
The doctor had arrived for his daily rounds. For a moment, he simply stared at the bizarre scene inside the room with confusion in his eyes. Before the lawyer could stand to offer a greeting, I yelped out from the corner where the man had deposited me.
え？ついさっきまでここにいたと報告を受けていたんですが、そうだろう。
He turned to the nurse at his side for confirmation, a hint of alarm in his voice.
はい、
確認しましたのでそう伝えましたが。
The startled nurse looked around the room as if expecting to find my mother hiding in a corner.
そんな。
It was all too much for me to process. Everything was moving forward smoothly only an hour ago, but now we were derailed, hurtling rapidly away in darkness and confusion, all of our painstaking work falling apart around us. I had to look for my mother. I had to keep her from finding out about that article. I had to get out of this room, away from these people. Countless thoughts stampeded wildly through my head, but there was just one thing that seemed clear to me. I couldn't just sit there waiting. Before anything else, I had to find Mom. And all of a sudden, I remembered.
ここを出るときには一度屋上に上がって空を見てみたいわ。
The words rang out so clearly in my ears that for a moment I thought she was really there, speaking to me. Pushing my way around the man who'd been holding me in check, I slipped past the doctor and dashed out into the deserted hallway.
こら、待ちなさい。
I heard voices from behind. I ignored them. I didn't have any real proof, but there was nothing else for me to go on, so I had no choice but to cling to my intuition. Taking the stairs two at a time, I headed for the very top of the building. By the time I managed to struggle all the way to the rooftop, my breath was coming in quick, ragged gasps, and my legs were burning beneath me. I felt about ready to collapse. After all, I had sprinted from my house to the hospital, and then from Mom's room up to the roof, with barely a pause in between. But my exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. I threw myself against the door with the last of my momentum, swinging it open wide. Alone in the dark, engulfed by the roar of the rainstorm, I screamed for my mother. It was coming down so hard now that mist was rising from the bare concrete. Even seeing across the rooftop was a challenge. Naturally enough, given the weather, I couldn't make out any signs of human presence. But just as I muttered those words, a white shadow stirred in the darkness. It was a human being, a woman dressed in the white clothes of a patient, standing in the rain. From her height and length of her hair, I realized at once it was my mother. I splashed through the puddles to her side. She was staring blankly up into the sky, battered by the powerful rain, her entire body utterly soaked. I grabbed my mother by the shoulder and shook her frantically, trying to catch her attention. But her eyes were fixed in the sky. She didn't so much as budge. It was obvious at a glance that something was terribly wrong. Halfway through the sentence, I noticed something lying on the ground at the very edge of my peripheral vision. It was flapping around in the wind. I had the feeling I'd seen it before. Not that long ago, in fact. That cover. That tasteful painting. The work of a well-known artist. Those headlines set in a restrained, professional font. The magazine containing that article was lying at my mother's feet. My hand slipped off her shoulder. I staggered backward, barely staying on my feet. Why had this happened? Why did everything have to fall apart just when we were finally starting to move forward? Why was my mother standing there soaking wet? Why did she have that blank expression on her face? Many questions bubbled to the surface of my mind. None of them had answers. They just sat there suspended in my mind, stagnating, until they putrefied into a pool of solid sludge. My mother fixed her lifeless eyes on mine. I was startled. It was the first time for as long as I could remember that my mother had looked me straight in the face. But that was, without a doubt, the worst possible way for that chain to be broken.
あなた、どなた？
There was no light in Mom's eyes. The words she spoke posed a question, but there was nothing like actual curiosity behind them. It was the voice of a machine.
言ってるの？
I wanted desperately to convince myself she was joking, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't make myself believe it. The evidence before my eyes was simply too powerful.
どなたですか？
Mom's face was paler than white, and at the center of her wide eyes, there were two dark, bottomless wells where her pupils had been. Those tiny spots of black seemed more vast and more profound than the black sky stretching out endlessly above us. I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and I was afraid. It felt as though I might fall into those pools of darkness and disappear. But I couldn't stop staring. I couldn't avert my eyes from the thing that was trying to swallow me whole. After all, she was the only person left in the world who'd ever acknowledged my existence. I called out to her, praying the word might pull her back from across the chasm that separated us. But it was too wide. My voice was too weak. I was too weak.
言わ
I shrunk away. Just one step. My heel slid backward across the wet roof. And then, just for a moment, it felt as though my body was floating. Disoriented by a sharp impact on my backside, I didn't realize that I'd been pushed out of the way until I saw the doctor moving past me.
早く他の患者に見つからないようにベッドへ。
As I sat stunned on the wet concrete, they took my vacant-eyed mother in their arms. They were carrying her off like an oversized doll, away from me, to some place I didn't know. Pushing myself up off the ground, screaming, I ran toward her. I didn't make it 3 steps before another nurse caught me in her arms.
お母さんを連れて行かないで！
大丈夫よ由美子さん、大丈夫だから。
いや、どこに連れて行くの？やめて！
Rising above the pattering of the black rain, a baleful roar filled the air, crawling up from the depths of the earth, demolishing everything in its path. That sound, like a massive boulder tumbling relentlessly across the world, merged with the scene before my eyes, and engraved itself violently onto my heart. I tried to follow with my eyes as they carried her away. I strangled out one final cry. In response, the world filled with intense light, as though a dozen cameras had flashed at once. For a moment, I was dazzled. And by the time my vision returned to normal, there was nothing left to see. No, not quite nothing. On that otherwise empty roof, one waterlogged magazine remained. It was dissolving by now, paper melting away, ink blurring to illegibility. But my memory of the truth it contained wouldn't disappear so easily. My broken mother was gone. The doctor who'd smiled and told me she would be leaving the hospital was gone. I was absolutely alone. I crumbled where I stood. My knees to the ground first, then my hands, then my face. The wet concrete was pleasantly cold against my cheek. Maybe if I lay here long enough, I would melt away and disappear, just like that magazine.
つい
The ground was cold, but my body was hot. I'd used up everything I had. I was empty. I'd given up on the very idea of moving. The merciless rain continued to pour down on me. Jet black rain, even though it wasn't night. The vicious dark water pooled around me, creeping up my body as if to swallow me whole. Hey everyone, J Square John Jeremy here. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to click on subscribe and the bell icon to ensure you're kept up to date on the channel. Until next time, so long and take care.